Benny Goes Buggy by Michael Sullivan, illustrated by Gideon Kendall. Benny Goes Buggy. The cricket struggled, hanging upside down by one leg. Benny opened his mouth. Kids cheered. He dropped the cricket. They cheered louder. Gulp. Benny Collie ate anything from money. Bugs were his specialty. Not because he liked bugs, because kids would pay to see it. Yes, it was gross, but once he swallowed a bug, it didn't wiggle much, and money was money. Paul Kim handed Benny some money, laughing. That was too cool, man, he said. He slapped Benny on the back hard enough to knock his cap off. What's Paul started to say, pointing at Benny's head, but Benny crammed his cap back on and ran. At first, the stubby things growing on Benny's head had looked like weird hairs. Now, after 2 weeks, they looked more like maybe antennae? A voice in his head said, "You are what you eat." He ignored it and headed home. At lunch that day, Benny piled his plate with food. He had to gain some weight. His waist was getting so skinny it almost looked like an ant's waist. His dad asked about his day. Benny was all set to tell him about the flattened frog he'd seen on the road. Instead, he said, "Chirp." Benny slapped his hand over his mouth. What was that? He felt strange. Was he getting sick? Dad looked startled. Before he could say anything, his cell phone rang and he got up to answer it. Benny looked down. His feet no longer touched the floor. He stood up and his pants fell down. He sprinted for the stairs before Dad could see him. Maybe this was just a dream. Please, he thought, let this be a dream. He put toothpaste on his toothbrush, but he could barely reach over the sink to brush his... Wait, where were his teeth? His missing teeth should have bothered him, but he wasn't thinking clearly. It seemed like his thoughts were shrinking, just like his body. He returned to his room, crawled under the bed, and fell asleep. It was still light outside when he woke. His head ached. He moved his stiff legs and crawled out from under the bed. 6 tiny feet clicked on the floor. Benny jumped in surprise and horror. He found himself in the air, hovering. He yelled for his dad, but all he heard was the bzzz of his own vibrating wings. No, this could not be happening. All his fly brain could think was, "Outside! Get outside!" He tried to stop and reason, but he couldn't. He flew desperately around his bedroom, banging into walls. Finally, he bumped his head against the window and dropped to the sill. He found the screen and crawled around the mesh until he found a hole. It was small, but Benny pushed through it, dragging his heavy wings. He tumbled free. He was riding on the wind. A breeze lifted him up and he zipped through the air fast. He rose higher. He might be a bug, but this flying thing was a blast. Then he heard a whirr and looked down. A bright green dragonfly with eyes like big sparkling basketballs was coming right for him. Dragonflies ate bugs. Benny zipped left, then right. No good. That dragonfly was like a flying acrobat. This was bad. Benny flew straight up, pumping his wings as hard as he could. Mistake. Straight ahead was a bird as big as a flying house. The bird saw him and opened its beak wide. This was it. Benny was doomed. He screamed a soundless scream. He tried to cover his eyes with his wings. Then something knocked him sideways. He fell. As he fell, he looked up. The dragonfly was crushed in the bird's beak. Benny thumped onto a picnic table. He looked around. He wiggled his feet. He'd made it. He was alive. Then he felt a hard tug on his wings. He was in the air again. A hand was lifting him. Benny stared into the face of Paul Kim. Benny tried to yell at Paul, to tell Paul who he was, but Paul didn't seem to understand. Benny struggled between Paul's finger and thumb. "Where's Benny Collie?" Paul called. "Haven't seen him all day," someone yelled back. Paul shrugged. He pointed to another kid. "Hey, you," he said. "Want to earn some money?" About fantasy. You know a story is a fantasy if the things that happen in it could not happen in real life. Benny's story takes place in a realistic world, but what happens to him is completely unreal. If you like reading fantasies, you may also want to try these: The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary, Chocolate Fever by Robert Smith, or Rats on the Range and Other Stories by James Marshall.